I'm Chaplain Scott of the Oregon National Guard. This is the Hope in the Trenches podcast. Where going forward, I'll sit down for conversations with people who offer interesting and informative perspectives on finding strength for life and work in the trenches, and even improving our spiritual posture. Whether you feel like you're under heavy bombardment or ready to go over the top toward a new objective, it's good to be with you. Our guest today is Command Sergeant Major retired Brunk Conley. Command Sergeant Major Conley served as the 10th Command Sergeant Major of the Army National Guard from 2012 until 2016, and then he retired in 2017. Prior to that, he served as the Command Sergeant Major of the Oregon National Guard. His more than 35-year military career began in December 1981. After attending one station unit training at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, Georgia, he was awarded the Blue Cord as an infantryman. He then served with 3rd Platoon, Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, where he held positions as a rifleman, grenadier, automatic rifleman, senior rifleman, and team leader. In 1986, his last year of active duty, he was placed on special duty orders at Huckleberry Creek Mountain Training Camp as a mountaineering instructor. Conley then transitioned to the Oregon Army Guard, where he served in a variety of leadership positions from squad leader through Command Sergeant Major at the battalion and brigade levels. Conley deployed overseas twice with the 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team, first to Baghdad in October 2003, and then to Kabul, Afghanistan in 2006. Additionally, he deployed to New Orleans in support of Hurricane Katrina relief efforts after the storm made landfall in August 2005. Command Sergeant Major Conley was recently inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame at Fort Moore. We'll ask more about that experience later. An article describing that event shared, "While Conley's military career was impressive, his commitment to service extended beyond the battlefield and into the classroom, where he taught high school physics and chemistry for many years, also serving as a baseball and football coach and embodying the citizen soldier ideal." Command Sergeant Major Conley and his wife Laura have 5 sons. My co-host today is Major Chris Clyne. Chris enlisted in the United States Army in 1998 as an infantryman, serving on active duty also with the 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis, Washington, from 98 to 2001. He was then accepted into the Green to Gold program at Utah State University ROTC, commissioning in 2003 in branching armor. After attending his officer basic course, he volunteered to deploy to Iraq with the Louisiana National Guard. That put all 3 of us in Baghdad at the same time. During that tour, he served as a platoon leader for the 1st Battalion, 256th Infantry Regiment's Battalion Mortar Platoon in Baghdad from 2004 to 2005. Upon returning to the United States, he was moved back to active duty and stationed with the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, where he served as a tank platoon leader from 2006 to 2007. He then separated from active duty and joined the Oregon National Guard. His first assignment in the Oregon Guard was as a company commander with 1st Battalion, 186th Infantry Regiment in Grants Pass, Oregon from 2008 to 2011. He took Delta Company on the 41st IBCT's 2009-2010 Iraq deployment. He then served as an assistant professor of military science at the University of Oregon ROTC before he became a public affairs officer and took command of the 115th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment. From 2018 to 2021, he was the 41st IBCT's public affairs officer, which included deploying to Kosovo in 2020. Our producer is First Sergeant Zach Holden, Public Affairs Specialist for the Oregon Guard and the First Sergeant for the 115th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment. Well, Command Sergeant Major Conley, thanks so much for joining us today on Hope in the Trenches.
Mm-hmm. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and welcome back into the building.
Yeah.
So, Sergeant Major, I saw this question asked by former Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston on an AFN commercial while we were deployed. He said, if I ask somebody where you're from, that's like a 1 or 2 word answer. But I kind of want to hear the story. So, how did you grow up, Sergeant Major?
Well, I was a son of a logger, right? And my mom was a homemaker. So my dad moved around the Willamette Valley in the logging towns. I spent time in Sweet Home in Lebanon and Albany, and finally ended up in Staten. Dad would was an outstanding logger, but he would jump off of the crummy, the work truck for a 25-cent raise to go to another crummy. He would go wherever the pay was the most. And so we moved around a little bit to find the good logging jobs when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, so how did you get interested in serving in the military? Because I read an article that said you were the first ever third generation paratrooper. Airborne.
Right.
Tell us about your family members who
So,
served, and how did you personally become interested?
okay, so the history, the Conley history of the Guard goes all the way back to the North Carolina militia and the Battle of Cowpens.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think anybody can touch my Guard credentials as far as family goes. But my dad, my grandfather, let's go to my grandfather jumped in Normandy and Holland with the 101st with the 502nd. Jumped in Normandy and made it through there, and then jumped in Holland, was wounded, and left for dead. He got seven machine gun bullets across the chest, lost a lung, arm was crippled, and he recovered, and they sent him in a convalescent ship back to Camp Atterbury, and he demobbed from Camp Atterbury, and that's where the Oregon Conley started. Okay, so my grandfather was from Kentucky. He was a Kentucky coal miner before he joined the 101st. His youngest brother, Michael, was in the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Yeah.
And he left Kentucky and during the war was down in a logging camp near Reedsport. Okay. And so when my grandpa recovered, he was talking to his brother and he said, "You need to come out to Oregon. Oregon is fantastic." And so my grandpa packed up his wife and 2 kids and came out here. And the third brother, my uncle was born in Silverton. So it's probably 49 or 50 when the family moved out to Oregon. And then my dad was enthralled with being a paratrooper. He wanted to be like his dad. Mm-hmm. And so the minute he was 18, he signed up and joined the 82nd Airborne and went out to Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, and was a second generation paratrooper. But I'm sure there were quite a few of them then. And then I grew up just hearing my dad tell stories about the family. And I had 5 uncles that were in Vietnam, all in the Army. So the Conley Army history is deep.
It is.
And long. And so I grew up around military stories. Mm-hmm. Well, I had no plans to join the military, all right? But my high school sweetheart and I were married, and we were expecting a baby in the early 80s, and the economy was terrible. And I go, I know where I can get insurance. Mm-hmm. So I went up to so bear with me on this story, all right? I didn't talk to my parents. I didn't talk to anybody. I just decided one day I was going to leave college. I was at Lynn Benton going to as a chemistry major. I said, I'm going in the Army. And I went up to MEPS, and they must have had a bonus day for recruiters if you sign a Ranger, because they told me, hey, I want to be airborne, and I like chemistry. I had chemical NCO and the 82nd written all over me, right? Because I had no clue.
Yeah.
And they said, they must have saw something. Said, we got the same thing. They're airborne. They're right up at Fort Lewis, all right? And it's called the Rangers. And I go, what do? They go, they do everything an 82nd does. And so I was familiar with Fort Lewis because my uncles coming back from Vietnam were stationed there as they were ETSing out of the Army. I said, all right, I'll do that. So I just signed up that day, came home to my dad and said, hey, Dad, I joined the Army today. And he goes, good, son, what'd you do? I go, I joined the Ranger Battalion. He goes, son, do you have any idea what you just did? Right? I go, what, Dad? I'm going to be airborne just like you. He goes, I don't think it's quite the same. So, I was in the delayed entry program. So we drove up to Fort Lewis as a civilian, and my dad took me into the CQ. They were on block leave, and I met this Ranger sergeant who was on duty, and immediately knew that I was going to it was going to be hard.
Yeah. So
that's the story. It was no plan, no intention. It was, I needed insurance for my family, and I needed insurance for the young child that we were about ready to have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that highlights something important, I think, too, because in my current role, I go to a lot of retirement ceremonies, and what I've heard people talk about too is that the reasons why we join are often not the same reason why we stay.
100%.
Yeah.
So it was hard, but it was that recruiter. If I could find that guy at MEPS that set me on that path, I would send him a gift card and thank you. And cause that assignment set me up for everything.
Wow.
Right. Everything. I mean, and I had no idea how lucky I was that day. So that's kind of the story, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chris, how did you end up at 275?
Very similar story. I was trying to go to college and to become a photojournalist. And same thing, I got married and I was like, well, how am I going to support my, family? And it was the same thing, walked into a recruiter and said like, hey, I would like to fly helicopters. Well, it's like, you should go into the infantry first and then like learn how they're supported by aviation. And then, you can do that out, because I had a private pilot's license. And I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. It's airborne, right?
Yeah.
And so very similar thing. Didn't know what I was getting into. Didn't really understand. I had a Ranger contract and then went there and kind of like, the starting of Apocalypse Now, for my sins, everyone gets what they want, but for my sins, I got this. So, I ended up in the Ranger Battalion, and luckily, same thing, like couldn't have asked for a better hookup for starting a military career, because, I was then able to get the discipline I needed, because I was failing out of college. I was taking one class. Didn't have the money to do it, and then just able to go through the Ranger Battalion, did my 3.5 years, came out green to gold, and then with Ranger School and be given some discipline and understanding of that, like was able to accomplish so much more.
Yeah, to add on to that, and I'm sure Major Clyne has the same experience. If you're successful in the Ranger Battalion, you can do anything in the Army.
I believe that.
Anything. Yeah. I know folks that went right to medical school. Well, went to college, had their college and medical school paid for. I know folks that became Army aviators. I know folks that became senior sergeants major in the entire Army. Folks that have left and have doctorates and have started businesses to great success. I think our recruiters were right. I mean, if you can go there and succeed, you've got the basics that you can do anything in life and in the Army, my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and you said it set you up for success in the rest of your career. What do you think it was about the Ranger Battalion and your experiences there that made the difference for you?
2 words. The 2 words that I learned that will help any soldier, any citizen in everything in their life. Never quit.
Never quit.
That's the single 2 words that are the success to Ranger School, success to anything. No one can make you quit. If you never quit, you're going to succeed.
Yeah. Well, and so I was going to ask you about the Ranger Creed, right? Can you still recite the Ranger Creed? And,
I can.
Maybe I should, yeah. Oh, I'm sure. And
recognizing I volunteered, fully knowing that, I won't keep going.
Right, because they make you memorize that. And well,
yes, they do.
Because yep. Any particular lines from that creed, right? Because I mean, never quit. That's a big part of the warrior ethos, and I think the Ranger Creed is kind of in that same. Right, they're kind of part and parcel to the same thing, right? Anything in particular?
Yes, nobody gets through it alone. I will never leave a fallen comrade.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody gets through any of these things without a Ranger buddy, without support, without family, without employers, and all that. So never leave a fallen comrade. You can't get through anything without your comrades, and that's why that's so important.
Yeah, that commitment to one another, the connection that we have to each other.
Yeah, and for me, the 100% and then some is before I joined the Ranger Battalion, I had no idea what 100% was. It's like, oh, just like, oh, I tried really hard. No, it's like 100% and then some. It's like you get to see what you're capable of because you
Oh,
are
yeah.
going to go to your absolute physical limit. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, wow, I didn't know I was capable of that. It's like, I didn't know that I could just keep walking for 30 miles, just like I had
Yeah.
no clue, because there's no place in regular society where you would ever be subjected to that type of stressor,
Yeah.
so it's like, oh crap, well, yeah. And then when you see what you can do, you're like, oh crap, well, I, what else can I do?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for going to other parts of your life through college or whatever challenge that you
Yeah.
want to accomplish, it's there, and you're like, yeah, as long as I believe in myself and give 100%, like I probably can do anything. And that organization just somehow infuses that into you.
Yeah, next level.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I know before I joined the Army, I think I'd run further than a mile once in my life. Right.
Right.
I didn't run cross country or anything like that too. And
Yeah.
then pretty soon you're running almost every day. And I did have that moment early on. It was my first term. This was ROTC, so it's very different. But we did a ruck run and I passed out like right as we were finishing the 6 mile ruck run. But you learn something from that, right? I mean, who in their right mind says, "Oh, I'm going to run until I pass out." But then when
Right.
something like that happens, you realize, you can go pretty far,
Yeah.
if you push yourself. Well, so Sergeant Major, you were recently inducted into the Army Ranger Hall of Fame. What did that mean to you, and what did it mean to you to have members from your original squad from 2nd Ranger Battalion alongside you for that event?
It's the best thing that ever happened to me in my military career, right? It was a validation of years of hard work and trying to live the Ranger Creed in not only the 2nd Ranger Battalion, but in civilian life and my family life and the National Guard life and career-wise. I was humbled and flabbergasted that I would even be considered for something like that. Because, there's only 430 some odd members, and there's only 4 guardsmen total in the whole membership. And out of those 4, only 2 traditional soldiers. 2 were AGRs and 2 were traditional soldiers. So it was incredible. I can't even put into words the honor that I felt. And Major Clyne can tell you, because he was at the ceremony. There's a thing called the Abrams Charter, and I think it's important to the audience to hear this, so I'll go a little in depth.
Yeah, please.
Post-Vietnam, General Creighton Abrams was in Vietnam and became the chief of staff of the Army post-Vietnam, and realized that there was a big morale and discipline issue in the Army overall. Because we were transitioning from a draft Army to an all-volunteer Army. He knew that he needed to get things set and improve the discipline in the Army. So he started the 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalion. Matter of fact, the 50th anniversary for 1st Battalion was just this past spring, and the 50th anniversary of the 2nd Ranger Battalion is this October. And the charter was that he would start 2 Ranger battalions that would be the best infantry units in the entire world. Everywhere they went, it would be clear that they were the best, and they were the standard setters for everybody. However, it was never his intent for folks to stay in the Rangers long term. And so he wanted to seed the Army with these great infantrymen and send them out to the other units in the Army to improve discipline and morale.
Change the culture.
So that was the Abrams Charter, and it was very successful. However, the unintended consequence of that was folks like Major Clyne and I, because not only did he seed the Army, he seeded the National Guard, the reserves, corporate America, governmental America, high schools, businesses, and families. And I took great pride in that, because I would like to believe that I took that charter to the other aspects of my life, and getting the opportunity to lead at a high level in National Guard. I would like to believe that infected the Guard too. I may be biased, but it was the capstone to what was a fairly good career.
Well, a couple things jumped out about that too, because correct me if I'm wrong, but with the history of the Ranger Regiment too, Ranger School was still going the whole time, but But prior to that, they didn't have the Ranger battalions.
No.
Okay.
And when in 85, they stood up 3rd Ranger Battalion and regimental headquarters. So I was in when there were just 2 battalions at the beginning. Then the transition to the regiment occurred at the end of my active duty career.
Okay.
And they took a lot of Rangers from 1st and 2nd Battalion to start 3rd Battalion.
Okay. Yeah, and you touched on this earlier too, that if you can succeed in Ranger Battalion, if you can make it through Ranger School, there's not a lot that you can't do if you put your mind to it. So there was an Undersecretary of the Army some years back, the Honorable Patrick Murphy. He was also an 82nd Airborne Division paratrooper and the first Global War on Terror veteran in Congress. But he messaged soldier for life, or that soldier for life idea, saying that every soldier is a leader of character for a lifetime of service. Because I like how you highlighted that, not everybody serves 20 or 30 or more years in uniform. They go on from their time in the military to do other things. And being what makes us successful in the military really translates well to every aspect of life.
Well, I was in I was back in DC when they stood up the Soldier for Life program. Really, it's a I don't know what the word to say. Let's just say that the Marines have always had once a Marine, always a Marine. And my entire life, you would see trucks driving down the freeway with the globe and anchor.
Yeah, Semper Fi.
Right? Semper Fi. Yeah. And they take great pride in being Marines, right? You even have it in the Guard, right? Any unit that has a former Marine, they'll let you know that they were in the Marines first. And that's awesome. Yeah. And so the Army was going through a little bit of crisis of retention and getting the word out on the street. And so they came up with the Soldier for Life program. And I think it's been fairly successful. I think it has changed some mindsets of some veterans that have left the service and are out there. I do see more Soldier for Life stickers on cars and notebooks and things that I see around. So I think it has been a good program.
Yeah, and I think there was one veteran service organization too that often messaged, don't let what you did in the military be the last great thing that you ever did, and build on that, because our society needs people with those types of experience, that never quit attitude, that never leave a fallen comrade mentality. So let's circle back, Sergeant Major. So you went from 2nd Ranger Battalion, then you were a trainer for the Ranger Battalions for a while. Your last assignment on active duty.
I worked at Huckleberry Creek for my last year as a ski and mountaineering instructor.
Okay.
Right, and then ETS and joined the Guard.
Well, so was that the plan to go back to Oregon all along, or what?
No.
What was that transition like?
No, I consider myself a good Ranger, and at the 3rd year, I liked the Army, and I was good at the Army. And so I went down they had just stood up for Special Forces Group in Washington, or in Fort Lewis. So I went down there and talked to a recruiter, and I came home one day and I talked to my wife. We had now had 2 children. Matter of fact, young Major Nick Conley was a 1-year-old. And I came home and I said, "Hey, Laura, I think I'm going to stay in. I think I think Special Forces is the way I want to go. I like training. I like teaching. And their mission, I couldn't see myself staying in the Ranger Battalion forever. And so I came home and she goes, "Well, that's fine. You you can re-enlist, but I'm ETS and going back to Oregon. I go, what do you mean? She goes, I'm done. Right. I'm finished. I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, oh, we hadn't had that serious conversation. So I said, well, obviously I'm not picking the Army, I'm picking you. And the only thing I want to do is teach and coach, but I'm fearful of living on a one teacher salary. So if you're giving me the ultimatum that I can't stay in the Army, I'm giving you the ultimatum that you're going to be a teacher too. Right. And she said, fair enough. Right. And so we came back and used our education benefits, and I'm telling you what, we were starving students. I mean, we had 2 kids going to Western Oregon. I joined the Guard. That helped financially. And we muscled our way through college. It was a struggle, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't change it for anything. But it was very challenging. And just so people know, too, I was a terrible guardsman for about 3-4 years. I joined the unit when my dad was my section leader.
Oh, okay.
In the Silverton Armory. And it was it was a TLAT. It's called Tow Light Anti-Tank Unit. And so we had Jeeps and tows, the anti-tank weapon. And I was, had bad morale. I didn't care. I was a sergeant, but I wasn't a leader. I had a bad impression. I got told all these stories. Hey, join the Guard and you're going to go drink beer on the weekend. And we trained hard. And I'm going, oh man, I'm struggling with college, struggling with school. I was probably embarrassing to my dad a little bit.
Just kind of punching the clock.
Did
it just feel like one more thing to do, one more thing on your plate?
I wasn't motivated. My focus was on college. The Guard really was just, I needed the money, right? I needed the student loan repayment. And I was a bad soldier. I wouldn't say bad. I was mediocre at best. And I realized it and I recognized it. I overcame it.
How did you find that self-awareness?
Well, I realized I had a break in service, right? So I went ING for a little bit. And then I missed it, right? And I missed it. And I told myself, if you go back, Brunk, you can't be the same as you were. That you weren't living the Ranger creed. You weren't living the soldier or the warrior ethos. And so I said, if you do this, you can't. You got to go back to your real roots. And so I came back, and that's the good thing. The Guard accepted me back. Yeah. Right. They could have, I didn't have bad paper, and I wasn't AWOL, and I didn't skip drills. I just wasn't living the Ranger creed. Yeah. And it was disappointing to the leadership and to my dad. So I came back and got serious. Yeah. Right. And another story, so I made staff sergeant. I got promoted, and I got to the 10-year mark. Right. And I was serious. But at that point, I was also successful as a teacher. I was successful as a coach. I was the science department chair. I was, doing great things. And we had 5 sons now. So I was at the 10-year mark, and my reenlistment was coming up. And I said, okay, you're doing good, but this is it. It's either all in or all out, right? You're halfway there, but if you get out, you can focus on your family and your career, right? And so I made the decision, without talking to my wife again, always a poor decision, that I was going to get out. So I came home. I said, hey, dear, I decided that I'm going to get out of the Guard. And to my surprise, it was opposite about me staying in the Army. When I told her I was going to get out of the Guard, she goes, no, you're not. And I was flabbergasted. I'm going, what? I thought, it'd be great. We can focus more on family. We can, I can focus on the kids and work and all that. And she goes, no, that's the only weekend we get away from you. Right. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? She goes, Brunk, you're so intense, right? You're so driven, right? That weekend we like to sleep in and not be forced to mow the lawn and watch cartoons and right and relax. And I just laughed and I said, All right, honey, as long as you know, if I sign that paperwork, I'm getting really serious.
I'm all in. Yeah.
I'm all in. I'm going to be, at that point, I said, I'm going to be the state sergeant major. All right. I didn't think about national stuff. I just said,
Yeah.
at that point, and that's when my National Guard career really changed.
You embraced
Right?
it.
Yeah, I started doing, I mean, while everybody else was sleeping in, I was up at 5 o'clock doing correspondence courses. When it was time to shoot at the range, I made sure I shot expert. When it's PT test, I made sure I maxed it. When it was NCOER time, I made sure that, that it was done and on time and that I had performed well enough. And the moral of the story was the next 3 promotion lists, I was number 1 in my MOS each time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the Guard let me be a poor soldier first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let me recover. And I always appreciated that about the organization.
Well, that's thanks for sharing that and being honest about that too. And well, I mean, it's funny. Maybe you've probably experienced this too. I meet people all over the place. Especially around like the VFW or the Legion, places like that. People tell me, "I wish I'd have stayed in."
Yeah, if I would have stayed in, I would be retired.
I wish I'd have stayed in. Yeah, I've never met anybody who said I should have gotten out sooner.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
And you need that
Yeah.
operational pause to
Yeah.
collect your momentum.
And we have those kind of, I mean, it's never a straight line growth curve, right? Always trending upward. There are times when we need to take a breather, and it's hard to be. I mean, you've got to make the time to invest in yourself and your professional development outside of those drill weekends and outside of that annual training in the summer, to keep growing and advancing and staying sharp. I mean, just take PT for example, right? Because you show up. I mean, we're required to take the new Army Combat Fitness test every year. If you only did PT on drill weekends, there's no way you would be successful in that. It takes some investment.
Mm-hmm.
How did you balance being a citizen soldier, being a traditional guardsman? Because I know that's important to you and that identity as a citizen and a soldier. How did you balance that? Or do you? Well, some people don't like that word balance, right? Because
no, I think it's I think it's a fine word. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard, right? Because if you're successful in you have to have a civilian career, a civilian job,
mm-hmm.
a supportive job to be successful in the Guard, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's very few folks that can live off, I won't use the term, but that can find part-time work in the Guard to make ends meet instead of just, a traditional Guardsman 1 weekend in annual training. So it's challenging. And sometimes you're not the best soldier at drill that you want to be. Right? Because I can tell you so many times when I was coaching football and we get done with the Friday night game and I haven't thought about drill at all.
Yeah.
Right? I know what we're doing. I know the basics, but I haven't prepared. And I've come in and, I'd split train if it's a MUTA 5 because I'm not missing Friday night football game. Right? I'm just not. And then I come in Saturday morning and you're not at your best. And that's okay. That's okay. We have to have leaders that recognize that without the civilian job, they can't be in the Guard. And I have to give them some leeway and know, hey, by Friday afternoon, I was caught up. But Friday morning, I may not have been at my A game. So I would say you have to allow, as a leader, you have to allow for soldiers to not be at the very top of their game at drill weekend, knowing the character of that soldier, that when you mobilize and you get ready, that they will be at the top of their game.
Yeah.
Right. And it's hard for a leader because, as officers, as company commanders, it's hard. Your unit is a reflection of you. Right. And so it's hard for you to not want everybody to be at 100% all the time. But you have to realize that training is not the game. The game is mobilization. The game is going direct. The game is going to a flood or a fire or a hurricane. And you have to be okay with these folks sometimes barely getting through.
Yeah.
Right. So balance, sometimes the balance has to go on the side of the civilian career.
Right. Yeah.
It just has to if you want to keep the soldier.
Right.
Because you make them choose, they're not choosing the guard.
Right.
Right. They're going to choose the one that gives them insurance and pays the bills and takes care of their family. So you have to be okay sometimes with soldiers that are a little tired.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the benefit to the nation, is like you get for a great economical price, like people that can perform at active duty, levels with these people that are only part-time, soldiers. So it's like once that deployment cycle comes up and the training takes off, it's like I could not believe how fast a National Guard unit can catch up with an active duty one, and it's that part's amazing, and which like keeps me motivated to stay in the National Guard.
And they bring their civilian skills. So I'm going to tell a little story to the chaplain here about the 82nd. My dad was in the 82nd, and I love the 82nd. Right. However, when we were in Katrina, and I was a brigade CSM then, and we had 1st Battalion before it folded its flag from the North Portland area. It was miserable down there, and they were in this school down in the 9th Ward in New Orleans, and it was a mess, and they cleaned it up, and they had some soldiers that had great plumbing skills, and they went down to Home Depot, and they got some livestock feed troughs and put them on the roof, and they ran PVC pipe down, and they built outdoor showers, and they were the hit for the whole brigade, But then one day the 82nd troop came by. Can we use your showers? Come on in, boys. It's okay. Come on in. We love you. And it's because that you show them that we bring our civilian skills to bear when we go on a deployment. Because I think it would be a stretch to think that the 82nd had the manpower or the know-how to build that, because they're mostly young soldiers that haven't had a lot of civilian experience yet.
Right.
And so we loved the 82nd. We let them come in, but it was pretty funny. And my guys wouldn't let them live it down.
Well, I learned that early on in the war in Iraq that what the National Guard and the reserves bring to the total army is really pretty important and pretty powerful. Well, and I think and so it's funny, we were all in Baghdad at the same time during that 04-05 deployment with different units, because Chris was an active duty lieutenant with the Louisiana Guard. I was an active duty engineer officer with 1st Cav, and you were the battalion command sergeant major then. And I think that really was a great example of kind of the maybe a shift in understanding of what the Guard was capable of.
Well, yeah, I mean, OIF-1, the Army got used up big. Mm-hmm. And when OIF-2, the second iteration came around, they couldn't man the units they had to. And so OIF-2 was huge, tons of Guard units that filled that up and performed superbly.
Yep.
I would tell you that we were with 1st Cav under General Corelli and Command Sergeant Major Sayatola, and my battalion commander was ranked in the top 3 battalion commanders in the entire division. All right. So, and that was an OER. But from that, you make the jump that our dang battalion was as good as anybody there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would put that infantry battalion against any battalion, any straight leg infantry battalion that ever served.
That was the first time that I saw the 41st patch, and I never did I imagine that I would end up in Oregon.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that was a good time to be in Iraq. I mean, and I would tell you another thing that's great for the Oregon Guard and that unit in particular. Things changed after that, right? But that battalion and that brigade from Arkansas, the 39th, we were actually deployed as a battle space owner and doing the infantry mission. Mm-hmm. We were mounted, so we had to change. It wasn't dismounted like we were used to, but it was a true infantry mission, and we had the all-star team on that battalion. It was fantastic.
There's still a few of those soldiers around.
Yes.
Yeah, and doing great things for
They
the
are.
organization still. Yeah. So then, so after 2162, you were the brigade command sergeant major.
Well, I'm going to tell you another Laura story, right? So I interviewed for that job in the middle of Iraq, in the middle of our deployment in downtown Baghdad at midnight. And I had no idea that I would be selected. I mean, because remember I told you I was all in.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, I'll learn something. I'll put my name in that. I was the newest sergeant major in Oregon, right? I'd just been promoted in October of 03. And here I maybe had been a sergeant major, not even just over a year, maybe just over a year. But I said, I'll put my name in the hat and see what happens. And, if I don't get it, no big deal, right? So I interviewed, and General Pritt called me back the next day and goes, Sergeant Major, we've decided that we'd like to offer you the brigade sergeant major job. However, if you accept it, we expect you to deploy with us 9 months after you get back. Whoa, hold on. Okay, sir. Boy, I appreciate it. Can I call home? Can I have 24 hours to talk to my wife and Laura and make sure she's aware and supportive? And he goes, sure. So I called her and I said, hey, honey, I was offered the 41st Brigade. She goes, that's great. I know that I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. I know that you want higher levels of responsibility. I said, but if I take the job, dear, they want me to go to Afghanistan 9 months after we get back. And she goes, oh, do you think you can help soldiers? And I said, dear, I think I can after this experience. She goes, well, then you got to go. And that is the true American hero, right? Knowing that you've been gone 18, in that deployment, it would have been 18 months away from home.
Yep.
And then 9 months later, and it would end up being 16 months. And then you throw in Katrina unexpectedly. I was gone 40 out of 48 months from home.
Yeah.
All right. Not that that's any more than a lot of folks have given, but that's the sacrifice that my wife and my children made.
Oh, yeah.
Right. To support the unit.
Yeah. Well, in that, maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because serving in the National Guard is a big part of your life, even when you're not deploying back to back like that. If you're a traditional guardsman serving 1 week in a month and 2 weeks of annual training, that's 39 days a year. So if you only did those 39 days a year every 9 years or so, out of those 9 years, you've been gone a year, and that doesn't count the schools that we go to continue the professional development. It's significant. It's significant, but I mean, it enriches our lives. I mean, personally, I'm sure everybody at this table would agree. It's enriched my life, but it is a big sacrifice for the families. What was the transition? Well, I mean, we're skipping a lot of, because you ended up as the command sergeant major for the Oregon Army National Guard, and then went on to serve 5 years as the command sergeant major of the Army National Guard. Or four before retiring.
Because I came back and drilled a year.
Oh, you did?
I did.
I didn't know that.
I'll tell you why in a little bit.
Unless
you want to hear now.
No, go. Yeah, let's do that now.
Okay,
I don't want to skip over all that.
So this is technical stuff, but it's important because most guardsmen don't understand the rules. So to protect the organization, when a soldier deploys on a one-time occasional tour or an individual augmentation, right? They're put on a derivative UIC, so for tracking purposes, but it allows the state to backfill their vacant position, right? You have to do that because you can't go without first sergeants and sergeants major and company commanders. So to protect the organization, you put them on a derivative and you can backfill. To protect the soldier, when they come off of those orders, you're allowed to double slot them for a year. Right? No cost to the state, because we're talking control grades. We're talking field grade officers and E8s and above. You can double slot them for a year. And then at the end of that year, if they haven't found another position, you can administratively reduce them. Okay. So it's important for the soldier to protect them for that year, but then the soldier needs to know that they need to find a vacant paragraph and line number that they can occupy, or they face being reduced. And most states do a good job of finding that soldier, helping the soldier find a position that fits their needs, because you don't want to lose the soldier,
Right.
or reduce them unnecessarily. So I knew the rule. And in 2016, when my orders were over at Guard Bureau, I worked with the state sergeant major. It was Lake at the time, and then Sergeant Major Foch. And I said, I want to come back and drill for a year. And immediately, Sergeant Major Lake said, well, why would you want to do that? And I said, Sergeant Major, I will take the wreath off. I will stand at parade rest for you everywhere. I don't want to be in charge of anything. I've already done all the jobs in Oregon, but I need insurance for my wife. And if I do TRICARE Reserve Select out of my guard check, while we resettle and decide what we're going to do, it's only $200 instead of $1,200 gray area retiree, pay. And it won't cost you anything. I'll be free chicken. You double slot me for a year, and at the end of the year, I'll retire, and nobody's worse for wear. You've helped my family. I've helped the guard, and I promise I will drill every drill. Right? So when that happened, Sergeant Major Lake had retired, and Sergeant Major Foch had come on, and he was aware of the agreement, but not quite sure. So I think he was a little uneasy. Here comes the Army Guard CSM in my backyard, right? What's his motives? What's he want? So I took the wreath off. I was the staff sergeant major, and I went into Sergeant Major Foch's, and I stood at parade rest, and I say, Sergeant Major Foch, I'm reporting for duty. I will sweep the drill floors if that's what you want me to do. I will be on KP. I will do whatever you want me to do. And here's why we're doing this. And he realized that. And he goes, well, let me think about it for a drill, and I'll tell you what I want you to do next drill. All right. So he calls me in the next drill, and he goes, Sergeant Major, I want you to be on the retention team for this last year. So I want you to use your experience to talk. They were doing crossroads back then at that time, where they would bring soldiers 90 days to 180 days from their ETS, and we would tell them about all their benefits, about other opportunities. And I probably saved 10 soldiers during that time because I had no agenda. I wasn't getting an NCOER. I didn't have a unit. My unit was the Oregon Guard. I didn't care if they switched MOSs. I didn't care if they switched units. I would talk to the soldiers individually. I said, what do you really want? And they'd say, well, I had an infantryman, right? Wanted to be a dental hygienist. Wow. And I go, really? So I went down to the G1. I said, you got any dental hygienist openings? They go, yeah, we got one right here. I go, this kid and he met height and weight and PT and met drill and was a good soldier. We switched him over to a dental hygienist and got him a school. I had another soldier that didn't like his unit, but he was never given the option of switching units.
Yeah.
So I said, where do you live? What unit would you be willing to go? And we hauled him down to the G1 and said, transfer this kid over to Charlie Company. And so probably did that 10 times, probably saved the Guard a bunch of money for all the right reasons. Yeah. Because we retained them and didn't have to train new soldiers.
Yeah, we see that with retention all the time too. If somebody has a bad experience in that first unit, or that first line leader isn't a great leader, that just colors their whole guard.
They think every unit's like that.
Right. And we've touched on this a couple of times already too. There's so much opportunity out there in the military, and even in the National Guard. I learn about opportunities all the time, places where our guardsmen can serve and the jobs that they can do. We've just got to help people to see the opportunity that's out there.
Yeah, and it's mostly the younger soldiers. I mean, once they're on their second enlistment, they know. It's getting the word out to those first term soldiers on the opportunities and the options. They're just unaware. And I tell my grandchildren, I said, if you enlist, if you join the military, you're only in charge a couple times. You're in charge on your enlistment, and you're in charge on your re-enlistment. Other than that, you salute and you do what you're told to do. And so you better make informed decisions at both of those critical turning points. And we don't probably educate our first term soldiers enough on what their options are upon re-enlistment. Right. And we can do better. I think this is not an Oregon Guard thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's an Army thing.
Yeah.
Right. And all Guard units have the same problem.
Yeah, there are so many pressures on an organization and on leaders, and drill weekends can easily just become so task focused that we probably don't nurture those relationships as well as we could.
Well, I learned this early on. You can't train a vacancy. You can't equip a vacancy. You can't deploy a vacancy.
Right.
And so there's that fine line. I've heard it my whole career. If we just have great training, the soldiers will stay. Yeah. And then when you mobilize, if they don't have their dental panos done, and they don't have their HIV, and they don't have their family care plan, and they don't go. And you had great training, but now you have a vacancy. So there's a fine line between readiness and training to keep that soldier motivated. You can't neglect one for the other. You have to find the balance. And we use that word again. You have to find that balance. Story. All right. When I was first sergeant at Bravo 2-1-6-2 in Corvallis, I got down there and we were fantastic. We were killing it. We got to 100% strength. And it was a big deal. The first infantry company in the entire state to be 100% strength in years. So the state sergeant major came down and big celebration, and we're handing out mugs and coins, and everybody's patting each other on the back. How great we are. And then 9/11 happened, and then we went to an SRP right over there at the Arc in 2002, early 2. And my 100% unit, when it came down at the end of the day, was 62% deployable.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's when I go, what happened? What just happened? Well, when you get 100%, they count your Rep 63s against you that haven't even been to basic training. That's part of the 100%. Your sleep apneas and your dental plans and your family care plans and all those things reduced us down to 62%.
Wow.
And so you've got to be at 125%.
Yeah.
All right. And that was a lesson I learned. And the other lesson I learned from that, and I don't know if it's the message of this podcast, but a platoon will need a squad from another platoon. A company will need a platoon from another company. A company or a battalion will need another company. And we learned it with the 39th. A brigade needed Oregon to come fill them. That's just the Guard. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I think if we're going to distill that down to the individual level, I mean, readiness is very much part of the conversation for this podcast.
Right.
How to keeping ourselves ready physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, so that when our state calls to go fight wildfires, or when our nation calls to deploy and fight against our enemies, we need people who are ready, who and able to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was when I was back at Guard Bureau that they came up with the holistic health and fitness program. That it was not in existence when I was here and when we were deploying. We didn't do spiritual and mental and physical. We did physical readiness. Everybody, all the time.
We've always talked about that.
But we those are new programs. Relative, and you talk about the history of the Army. They're pretty new.
Yeah, we've always promoted in the Chaplain Corps. We've always promoted that spiritual readiness, and there's a lot of great analogy to physical fitness and other aspects of health. But it definitely helped us operationalize it and open the door for us to have those conversations to promote somebody being whole and healthy too. And I heard the previous chief of chaplains for the Army too talk about how and as an Army we want to return our people, whether they serve 6 years in uniform or 36 years in uniform. We want to return them back to their communities a whole and healthy person. So I do want to ask you about your transition to retirement then too, because serving in the Guard is such a big part of our lives while we're actively serving. You stayed connected to the Guard since you retired, but what has that transition to retirement been like? How have you directed that time and energy, and how do you stay healthy and fit and able to serve well and faithfully in the various roles in your life?
Well, there's a hierarchy of transition.
Hmm.
The hardest, in my opinion, is an active duty senior NCO who joined at 18 and has been in the Army 30, 35 years.
And hasn't known nothing
And,
else.
and they have other things, but they don't have experience in those things.
Yeah.
I would say then it's probably our reserve AGRs who are they're really typically like an active duty soldier. They're in the reserve and they move around state to state and nationwide, worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would say our National Guard AGRs or be next. Us civilian guys, it's easy, right? It is. I mean, we're primarily citizens, right? And it's pretty easy to transition to being only citizen instead of citizen soldier. So for me, it was not a hard transition at all. I try to stay connected because I'm an organization man, all right? I love the term citizen soldier. I hold it in high esteem, just below grandfather, father, and most importantly, husband. And so helping the organization find other citizen soldiers and complete their mission and is important to me.
Yeah.
And I'm an ambassador to the Oregon Guard whenever and however I can be. When I speak, I talk about it. When I meet people, I mean, I could be at the gas station and see somebody with the 7th ID hat and say, "Hey, you were in the 7th ID? Yeah, I just got out." And I said, "Hey, have you ever thought about the Guard?" Right? Mm-hmm. And I do that all the time because I believe in it.
Yep.
But for me, transition was I guess I should put federal technicians in there too. It's probably easier for them than AGRs. All right, should put them in the hierarchy somewhere. But it was easy for me.
Yeah.
Right. I got my wife and my family and we're out there and living life great in Staten. Fantastic.
Yes, and I encounter that all the time too. There's a little bit of a myth out there, and going back to what we talked about just briefly about maybe I think before we started recording about parents or people who don't know anybody who's in the military. I've heard a lot of people, they conceive of joining the military as, oh, that means I have to leave. Right. Yeah. Serving in the military means I go away. Mm-hmm. But you're right. We can stay connected in our communities, put down roots in a community throughout our time of service.
And that's a soldier you're looking for, right? You're looking for a soldier that wants to serve, but doesn't want to go to Korea, doesn't want to go to Italy, doesn't want to go to Fort Campbell.
Yeah.
Right. But they want to help their community, and there's benefits for them for college and resources. And in my career, I've probably recruited 50 to 100 students that I've just guided them to the Guard and said, "Have you thought about this?" And I'll have parents, I'm connected in Staten. Yeah. I grew up there and my kids went there and my grandkids are going to school there. The parents will seek me out and say, "Hey, would you talk to my kid about the military?" I said, "Yeah, of course." And that's one way that as you transition, you can help the organization. Mm-hmm. Every Oregon Guardsman that loves the Oregon Guard should be an ambassador.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
What do you miss about actively serving in uniform?
Not much. Really, that's a fact, right?
That was not the answer I expected.
I've told, I consider myself a teacher above all else.
Yeah.
Well, other than husband and father and grandfather, right? That's above all else. But I consider myself a teacher. And I was able to serve the soldiering is something I did that I liked and I believed in, and I believed in the organization. But I miss teaching more than I miss being a soldier. I don't miss the bell. I don't miss parent-teacher conferences, and I don't miss grading papers. But man, I miss the kids.
Yeah,
every day. I just don't want to be run by the bell anymore. So I still substitute.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's great.
for fun.
That's great.
I do it for fun.
Yeah. Well, and now when I think about that answer, it sounds like your career has been so fulfilling to you and filled you up in so many ways
Mm-hmm.
that right, and you were able to accomplish so much throughout your career. I guess that answer makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, because you got so much out of it.
I don't miss annual training. I don't. I'm damn glad I didn't go to JRTC this year. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Enough. Twice is
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can never win. And it's sometimes it's so demoralizing because you're working so hard. And those guys are so good that, you can't win. You can't win, even no matter how well you prepare. It's hard. They're experts down there.
That was my 4th time down there at different roles, but I feel like I felt a little bit guilty because I feel like I had the fast pass this time. I was only down there for 12 days.
Yeah, and we always go when it's so miserable weather-wise. You come out of this no humid 80, 85 degrees and you're down there 90 into 90% humidity. It's just miserable.
Yeah.
Hey, hope you had fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got a couple of questions left, but Chris, anything that you want to ask?
I just want to go back to that piece we were talking about where, the great thing, we have all three have been on active duty and on the National Guard side. And it's like that piece of, getting to go with Sergeant Major to the Ranger Hall of Fame. And he was there with his squad, that he first came into the Army with. And it's like those guys had to travel like all across the nation to get there. And it was great seeing his guys that had been there with him from day one. But that's the one thing I was just thinking about contrasting with like active duty to National Guard, where it's like your service in the National Guard, you will retire at the end. And those people that you served with and have the like shared experience are still going to be living in your community, most likely.
Yeah.
And it's like the guys that I've served with in the active duty Army, it's like they're all across the nation, some of them are foreign countries. And it's like that's another great aspect of the National Guard is, talking about transitioning into retirement. It's like when we go to ceremonies, we'll see people that have been commanders and have retired, but are coming still supporting the National Guard. And you just don't have that with the active duty. It's one of the great things I believe of serving in the National Guard is that you're still going to retain those relationships. Yeah. And it's not so much on the active duty side.
Yeah. Like we were talking about earlier, Bravo Company took 5 sets of brothers, Bravo 2162 to Iraq.
Yeah.
I had one soldier in Iraq and then had his mother in Afghanistan. That's another thing about and my dad was my first sergeant.
Oh, yeah.
And when he retired, I was his first sergeant. Right. Well, and I got to jump with my dad in the Guard. I've got pictures of me JMPI and him, and we jumped out of a Blackhawk together. I was number 1 guy and he was number 3, and we had pictures in the middle. Taking pictures of us.
Oh, that's great.
And only in the Guard.
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, those connections are great. He's an MPAD soldier now. His father was a 56 Mike chaplain assistant or religious affairs NCO now when I first came into the Oregon Guard. And we talked about this too. If it's something that you're willing to send your children into, that's pretty meaningful.
Yeah. Again, it's like proof that the organization, the quality of the organization, that people are willing to bring their family members and let them serve as well. That I think that talks volumes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm glad you said that. Since we're talking, and you said the audience is company and junior. We hope that's the audience.
Yeah, that's who we hope listens to it. Yeah.
So I would just say the organization I love right now is in need, all right? Mm-hmm. And we need quality soldiers, and we need quality soldiers that are in to stay in. And I guess, I don't know if they're watching or just listening. I would do a personal request that if you like the organization and you're struggling just with balance, like we talked about before, I would urge you to stick around and We need you. The organization needs you. If you're a first-term soldier and you're at that decision point of whether to reenlist, I would tell you this: I did 35 years. The first 10 years took forever. The last 25 seemed like they just zoomed by.
Yeah.
So if you're in that first term and you think, man, I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to get to 20, it goes faster than you think. The organization needs you. I've never heard anybody that got to 20 that regretted it, like we talked about before. And the benefits of making to 20 with the insurance and the pay and the benefits of space a travel and those things, you can't see the forest for the trees. And I would ask you to look past your current situation and think about the future retiree and the benefits that the organization would get from you staying and that you'll get from being a part of the organization at that 20-year mark.
Yeah.
I'm struggling in my current position, being a citizen, and how to help the Oregon maintain and increase in strength. Because it's like I said before, you can't train and equip and deploy a vacancy, and you can't fight fires and floods with as well as you can, just not as well as with the robust full organization. So we need them. We need those young Americans.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll choose to stick with us. It's that important.
Yeah. And so the theme for the podcast is living and leading with hope.
Yeah.
I would say that's this chaplain's favorite 4-letter word. And
Hope.
I was a paratrooper before I was a chaplain, so
Right.
I know them all. But hope is important. And I think for young people who are maybe thinking about joining or want to do something meaningful, serving in the military is incredibly meaningful. And I mean, right now we have soldiers and airmen who are on crews fighting fires in Central Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
We have soldiers and leaders who are getting ready to deploy to places like the Middle East. They're on their way to Kosovo. Chris and I were on the Kosovo rotation in 2020. And I tell this story. I've told it on the podcast a couple times. I tell it to audiences everywhere. Before we went to Kosovo, people, they would joke. They're like, hey, the people of Kosovo love Americans. And someone said they would become the 51st state if they could. And I kind of laughed and I thought, okay, that's great. But no kidding, while we were there, I engaged with religious leaders. And I had a couple people tell me, people of Kosovo tell me that they want to become the 51st state. One guy said, if we could pick up the soil from the Balkans and move it to North America, we would. He said, we want to beat Puerto Rico to statehood. And everywhere that we went, they saw the American flag, and they would tell us just how meaningful it was that KFOR was still there. And they would say, we love KFOR, but most of all, we love the Americans because of what you did for us. And they saw that flag, and it gave them hope.
Mm-hmm.
Then in 2021, I came back to Oregon, and we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I got to go visit some of our soldiers and airmen who were serving at one of the vaccination sites just right over here at the fairgrounds. I think it's that way. Yeah. And yeah, I saw the same thing. People saw young airmen and soldiers in uniform, and it gave them hope in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a difficult time. So if people want to do something that's meaningful, that gives others hope, there aren't as many things that you can do that will contribute as much to the welfare of America and the world as much as serving in uniform.
So I'll give you another story
Yeah.
from experience when I was a first sergeant. The Biscuit Fire down in southeastern Oregon, right, is from Brookings all the way up to the Rogue. We were securing the area so that to try to prevent civilians from going into dangerous areas.
Yeah.
So we had checkpoints around. those citizens were so thankful for I would drive around. It would take me 8 hours to drive to all the checkpoints that we had at all the dirt Forest Service roads, going up into where the fire was at. These kids were getting fed. They had one group, a citizen came by and gave them a generator with a dish antenna and a TV, right? Right. They had pop-up tents that they were giving them. They were bringing apple pies.
Yeah.
That's what makes you feel like being in this uniform is so worthwhile. Same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But when you respond to a local thing like the COVID response, and you see your middle school teacher, like you said, that soldier saw the middle school teacher come by. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And boy, the hope that you give our citizens and the security and the sigh of relief when they see our Oregon Guard coming to help is amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and kind of as we wrap it up, Sergeant Major, when you were at Army National Guard, you started a reading group. And so I always like to ask this question. Any books or podcasts or anything that you've read or listened to recently that you would recommend? Because I mean, leaders are readers, right? And or even if you listen to audiobooks or podcasts too, anything that can keep you growing and developing. Anything that you'd recommend to folks?
Yeah, the book that we read when I was back at Guard Bureau is called "I Am the Guard," and it gives a history of the Guard, and it needs to be updated, right?
Lieutenant Colonel Bomar told me there's a working group that's looking at it.
Because it needs to be updated because it ends pre 9/11.
Okay.
But it talks about from the start, from the Massachusetts Bay Company all the way through, and all the Dick Act and all the federal acts that brought us into the Guard that we are today. If you want to learn about the organization that you're a part of, I would recommend that book. As far as recently, I mean, I just recently read Bunker Hill. That was a good book. I would read anything about Lexington and Concord. Right. I also, there needs to be a book written about National Guard response to Pearl Harbor. Right. Because that's a great story. Right.
Oh yeah.
So,
and the 41st,
and there's island hopping through the Pacific.
Yeah.
So this is a 9/11 story. This is one of my favorite stories. All right. So it was a Tuesday, and it was the second week of school. All right. And my wife and I had this routine where I would go to school early. And I would do all my lesson plans, get ready for the day, because I was going to coach football at the end of the day. So I need to get ready for class. And then she would get the kids ready, get them off to school. And then she would stay at school and do her lesson plans. And the kids would come to whatever sport I was coaching. And that morning she called me. We didn't have TVs in our room at that point. And she called me and says, "Honey, something's going on. You need to go down to the library. You need to see what's going on. It's something going on in New York City." So I ran down there and watched the second plane hit the tower, right? And if you recall that day, we're old enough to recall it, then the Pentagon got hit, and then everybody's wondering what's next. We thought the whole nation, I mean, we didn't know if Wachang down here or a Trojan nuclear plant or someone on the West Coast was next. All the talking heads were saying we're under attack and we're scared, don't know what's going on. So I went to my principal and I said, "Ma'am, I got to go. I'm a first sergeant in Corvallis and we're under attack and I don't care what's going on. I'm reporting to duty." She goes, "We got you covered. You go." So I ran home, grabbed a uniform, threw it on, and I'm driving from Staten to Corvallis. It's about 45-minute drive, and I'm listening to the radio and I'm going, we all were doing the same thing. What in the hell is going on here? What, this is crazy. So on a Tuesday afternoon in September, you would normally expect there to be 3 cars at an armory, right? The readiness NCO, the training NCO, and the supply sergeant. I got there and there were 40 cars.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And I walk into the armory and there all my soldiers, "First sergeant, we're so glad you're here. We're under attack." Nobody called them. There was an alert. They just dropped what they were doing and they showed up. And I got to imagine that same thing happened at every armory
All over the
across our
country.
nation.
Yeah.
Now, my guys brought every weapon and every bit of ammo that they possibly had in their house with them, right? And they said, we're ready. I go, all right, hold on. Let's put your weapons in the arms room. Let's keep the ammo in your car. Let's take a tactical pause and see if we can figure out what's going on. But I think that story needs to be told.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know it wasn't just in Corvallis. I bet you in every armory in the state, the same thing happened, and everywhere across this nation.
Oh, yeah.
That's what the Guard's about.
Yep.
That day right there. And you can imagine that at Lexington and Concord, when they're coming through saying the regulars are coming, that they're dropping their plow, they're dropping their blacksmith tools, and they're reporting to Concord Bridge, or on the day of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
I bet you $1 that same thing happened across Guard Nation.
Yeah.
I bet you they just showed up at their armories with nobody calling them.
That's the symbol of the National Guard, right?
Drop the plow.
The Minuteman with the plow and
Pick up the musket.
Yep.
Right.
Always ready, always there.
Always ready, always there, sir. And that's a hopeful message.
It
I
is.
know
It
that's
is.
our talk
It
today, and I
gives
might have
people
got
hope.
off track, but that's what makes this country great. That's what makes the Guard great.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. I love that story. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time today.
Hopefully, I didn't tell
Sergeant
too many stories.
Oh no, this is why we invited you in.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, and how much the organization and how much the National Guard and service has meant to you and to your family.
Well, you can't beat me on love of the Guard. You might be able to tie me, but you can't beat me.
Well, God bless you and your family, Sergeant
You too,
Major,
sir.
and everything you do now.
You too, sir. You too, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, Rangers lead the way, sir.
All the way.
This podcast is produced by the Oregon National Guard Public Affairs Office. My prayer for you is that wherever you find yourself, that you might find hope for today and strength for the ambiguity and chaos of life. Blessings on the rest of your day.